We will, but now analysis of the general election has revealed that some parties had a large gap between their share of total votes and the share of seats in Parliament.
And that has prompted fresh calls for a change of the electoral system. We're joined by Darren Hughes, who is from the Electoral Reform Society. He's the Chief Executive. Darren, thank you for coming in.
Good morning.
I think it was Sonia Soda, when we were talking to her an hour or so ago, from The Observer, who made the point that it's only the government that has the power to set that ball rolling, to change the system. And when the government is in power, they've inevitably got there because they've got a whacking majority, because the system as it stands has worked for them. So how, if ever, can this be changed?
I think that's a good point. You've got to try and get people to look beyond the specific election to what some of the trends are. And I think what the trends are is that people are no longer voting just in that traditional two-party, Party A, Party B kind of way. They're now voting for a lot of parties. In fact, this has made it the most disproportionate election we've ever had, because there were 4 parties that got more than 10% of the vote. So that really does show that voters are now changing. They're not voting for the same party for their whole life. So really, it does take Parliament and the government to look at this and say, can this hold if the system is not able to represent people, because seats in Parliament aren't accurately representing votes in the country.
Just to give those figures that you mentioned, Labour got 33.7% of the vote and yet got 412 MPs. Conservatives 10% less, 121 MPs. Reform had 14%, only 9% less than the Conservatives, and got 5. The Lib Dems actually got less of the vote share than Reform and got 71 MPs. It just shows how, in many people's eyes, how bonkers this is.
It doesn't really make sense, does it? I mean, really, it should be as simple as seats match votes. I mean, I think most people can understand that, but this is quite a complicated way of doing it. And I think it also just highlights the volatility. I don't see this going back to the old days of just people voting for one of the two parties. I think there has been a fundamental change. So when you can see a change staring you in the face, you either react to it and make it a positive thing, improve the health of our democracy, or you put your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. And I think that's why so many people are talking about this. As you say, the new government, 2/3 of the seats are 1/3 of the vote, and many of the smaller parties massively underrepresented in the new House of Commons.
Proponents, and people have been talking about this for years, haven't they, changing the electoral system. Proponents would say that what it does do is it gives a clean result, which in other countries perhaps you have lots more sort of jockeying position afterwards, whereas we went to bed on Thursday and we woke up and we had a new government on Friday. So does it make things, in a sense, more straightforward?
I think all systems have their pluses and their minuses, and the call you've got to make is the price too high at some point for the benefit that you're getting? And I think what I'd say is that, yes, it was a decisive result in one way, but there's nothing to say it wouldn't be different at the next election because of the volatility that exists. So I think bringing a little bit more predictability and stability into it would be a positive thing for voters. And as I mentioned before, it does feel that what's different this time is the 4 parties polling over 10%, 5 of them over 5%, and just such a stark difference. You take 2 very different parties, Reform and the Greens, 21% of the vote, just over 1 in 5 people in the country voted for them, and they've got 1% of the seats. It doesn't really matter what you think of these parties. Anyone standing back and looking at it would say that's just not fair, and we do want to have predictability, fairness and stability in our voting system.
And it looks like Nigel Farage is very much going to be campaigning on that for going forward, and because perhaps that is the most stark contrast, isn't it, is the number of seats that Reform got as opposed to the Liberal Democrats.
That's right, and they've broken through this time, and the Liberal Democrats have broken through previously and have made a comeback this time because they targeted particular areas. But I think and of course all these parties have benefited in a way from tactical voting, where people decide to vote for a different party than the one they prefer in order to stop a party they don't like. That's just another example of the complication that we introduce into all of this. And so if they've targeted particular areas, they've done quite well. But basically, yeah, stand back and look at it and say, should seats match votes? Should every vote count? And can we rebuild trust and faith in our institutions, which is at such a low point at the moment?
Just to think about how it might work. I mean, obviously people will remember that from the European Parliament had a form of proportional representation, didn't it, when we had EU elections. How would it work? Because one of the strengths of this is you have an MP in your seat in your area and they represent your area. How would it work if it were to be a proportional situation where how would you have a local voice?
So there's lots of different systems. I mean, the one consistent principle is that every vote counts, and so you can say to people, it doesn't matter where you live, you can go out and cast a vote, and there'll be some form of representation. In the UK, there's actually two systems that are used already. There's the single transferable vote used in Northern Ireland and in Scottish local elections, and the AMS system, which is used in Scotland, Wales, and the London Assembly. So millions of people in the UK are already familiar with proportional representation, and one of the features of those two systems I just mentioned is that they have a local element. You still have local faces that you're connected to, but it's designed in a way to make sure that your vote does count more fully, and that you don't have the bad luck, as it were, of supporting the wrong party because of where you've chosen to make your home. Really, every vote should count in a democracy, and that's what we've got to try and get on to do. And
just a final thought. I mean, obviously you are the Electoral Reform Society. If we take it full circle to where we started, the fact that a sitting government is never likely to want to change it because they've done well out of the current system, do you think it's ever like... And also that most people in the country seemingly think it maybe should change. Do you think it ever will?
I think it will if people take a longer-term view about the trends.
That's the problem in politics, isn't it?
You've got to really get people to look at it. I think there's a couple of other differences. One, inside the Labour Party, there's now much more support for this. Their members and their union affiliates have voted at their conference. There's a little bit more internal pressure than might normally be the case. And secondly, in the British Social Attitude Survey, which showed collapsing support for faith and trust in institutions, it did show majority support for changing the voting system. So I'm a little more hopeful because the evidence is now overwhelming, and I think people are taking a slightly longer term look, a second look at this, and think that we should have a system where seats match votes.
Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. Really fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is.